Hey, LEC community. Thank you so much for joining us for our Friday Platica of the week. We're hoping, we were just now starting to put out Platicas and figuring out the best way to do this. And we figured out that probably StreamYard is the way to go. My name is Susana Lizarraras. I'm the Chief Community Officer of the Latinx Education Collaborative. And if you haven't seen yet, I have been putting out our Platicas of the week. On Monday, I put them out to social media with the article titles and the article links. On Tuesdays, I go on IG Live and tell you my take. And then on Fridays, we invite you to let us know what you think. StreamYard feels like the best way to do that because I can put your comments up. And so as you come up with some thoughts about our article, please let me know and I will share it with our community. Our article this week is an opinion article, which I'm really excited about doing because opinion articles, I think, obviously are to spark discussion and perhaps some debate around. And so our article this week was titled Latinos Owe Black Americans Everything. It obviously has opinion in bold, big words because Antonio de Loera Brust is writing for Latino Rebels, and this is his opinion. I will start by saying that I'm a little slow to wake up this afternoon, this day. But I'm ready, and I hope that you're ready to engage. Let me know what you think, because this is a thought that I've had about just the historical relationship between Latinos and Black Americans, and like where is the correlation? Where is the historical fights that we've had together against the same white normative systems? And so if you haven't gotten a chance to read an article, get to it this weekend. It really is a thought-provoking article. So the article starts out with Antonio talking about the 14th Amendment and about how so many American nativists help me with that. Like Ann Coulter and Joe Arpaio are wanting to repeal that 14th Amendment. What's up, Katina? Katina says, welcome to pregnancy. Girl, I know. And it's hot, too. I can't handle it. Thanks, Katina, for joining us. Every 30 seconds in the United States, a Latino turns 18. Every 30 seconds. And so it's definitely on the thoughts and the eyes of our politicians to try to get our vote. The Latino vote is a growing vote and one of the greatest votes in this country. And if you are naive to that, I need you to read up on it because I know a lot of Latinos in my circle, voting is kind of like, oh, is it real? Oh, there's a lot of corruption around it. The Latino vote is very important. So do your research. There are organizations that do the research for you. And so do what you need to do, especially before November, to get knowledgeable. Anyway, the reason Antonio brings that up is because he's saying that repealing the 14th Amendment would take away our birthright citizenship. And so that's why so many politicians that disagree with what a lot of the policies that align with Latinos want to take that away because we're a threat. I mean, period, right? So he goes on to talk about the power wage war and putting a power wage war on us through mixed status family deportations, public charge rules, and messing with the U.S. Census. The U.S. Census is another way that systematically our country has failed and continues to disregard and fail the Latino community. So if you have the capacity of supporting Latinos to complete the census, please do so. I encourage you to do so. Thank you to the organizations that are making that happen here in Kansas City. I know that you are out there. Okay, now back to the title. Do Latinos owe Black Americans everything? I really enjoyed this article. I for real did, because Antonio brought up the fact that Latino immigrants were not born from the struggle for immigrant rights. I think that in and of itself would spark a lot of Latinos to be like, hold up. So let me start with this. I think that something that could have been done better at the beginning of this article, this is my opinion, is that there is obviously Latino struggle, especially when it comes to immigration, that can't be disregarded, that perhaps Black Americans haven't been a part of, right? I mean, just speaking from experience, my parents and their immigration story, it was 1984. My parents were undocumented. They came into the country. My mom was pregnant, and she talks about the snakes that were in the river as she was crossing. So just like this, like, you're not going to catch Susana Lizarraras in a river at night ever. And of course, I'm making that kind of comical, but it speaks to the dedication that my parents had and that a lot of our people had. And unfortunately, that a lot of our people have died for the dedication to achieve this American dream, right? So, of course, this is not to negate that there is Latino struggle that doesn't associate with Black struggle. But I want you to read this article with an open mind, because he continues to make these really good points, which is that the 14th Amendment was put in place after the Civil War to preserve the new freedoms of former slaves. Now, we know that enslaved people were African, and at that point of our history were African American and Black. And so the fight for racial justice started out with the fight for Black freedom here in America. And so he goes on to say that the fight has been principally been waged by Black Americans to the benefit of every racial minority group. So this article being titled Latinos Owe Black Americans Everything is in regards to that. Is in regards to the fact that Black Americans led the fight for civil rights. And we as Latinos benefited from the 14th Amendment and from a lot of that fight. Again, that is not to negate the fight that Latinos were participating in at the time. So, of course, we know Cesar Chavez, and he's mentioned in the article later on. But as we learned from Dr. Jean Chavez here in Kansas City recently, was all the early activism that Latinos were participating in as well and leading as well. LULAC being established in 1929, the American GI Forum in 1948, MALDEF in 1968, MANA in 1974, the National Council of La Raza in 1968, and it is now called Unidos US. So it's not to negate that Latinos were participating in or leading struggles for Mexican Americans, for Latinos, but it's definitely to elevate the fact that Black Americans and their struggle and their fight have contributed to our freedoms and to our privileges now as well. So Antonio goes on to say that non-Black people of color in America, especially those of us who are immigrants or descendants of recent immigrants, often feel like we don't fit into the Black and white racial binaries of American history. I will say, actually, let me pause because Katina has a good point that they work together. Yes. Again, Cesar Chavez gets mentioned later in the article, and I will talk a little bit more about that. Black Americans and Latinos work together in that civil rights movement, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But feeling like we don't fit into this Black and white racial binary, I know this is me personally. I could tell you so much more about Black history than I can about Mexican history, than I can about Latino history. And that comes from school, right? In school, I learned not enough about Black history, but more about Black history than about Mexico. Of course, my dog don't know how to act. but not as much as we should have learned, but I learned more about Black history than Latino history. So it did feel when I was growing up like, okay, I actually, up until very recently, was like, hey, where is the Latino history in this? Like, where were my people? What were my people doing at this time, right? And I just very recently started to learn about how Latinos and particularly Mexican Americans were in Kansas City up in the late 1800s. I had no idea. Of course, they were doing a lot of the work on the railroads. Perhaps I was naive to that, but that's not stuff I learned in school. So Latinos feel somehow neutral, alienated from the struggle for racial justice in America, especially when it comes to fighting for Black people. I heard recently that fighting for a group of people kind of alludes to that you have the privilege, the privilege above them. So maybe rewording that to when it comes to fighting with Black people, like Katina said earlier, learning from the Latino history of working with the civil rights groups that were working in the Civil Rights Act time, right? When the Civil Rights Act was passed. So here's the problem. And Antonio, there's a lot of problems. But Antonio goes on to say later that one of the problems with the Latino community right now is that, quote, some will no doubt stand with the police, with anti-Blackness, and ultimately with white power in America. That is the answer to where should Latinos stand in such times. Some will no doubt stand with the police, with anti-Blackness, and ultimately with white power in America. If you don't know the history of anti-Blackness around the world, I encourage you to do some of that research. But I was in a session last Saturday with Latinx parenting around raising anti-racist children. And something they mentioned was all this history behind anti-Blackness in Latin America. Something I learned, which again, perhaps I'm naive to, probably because I didn't learn it in school. Enslaved Africans were taken to Central America and to Latin American countries in greater numbers than brought here to America. Unfortunately, our history books are so focused on American history. And so I didn't know that. I mean, I just was talking to my husband about it yesterday. Like, can you believe there were tens of millions of enslaved Africans that were taken to Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, and South America and other places in Latin America, right? Katina chimed in that, as will some Black people, no doubt stand with the police, with anti-Blackness, and ultimately with white power in America. We have to acknowledge the history behind that, right? I think a lot of people in the Latinx community are naive to how much history plays into the narratives and the stereotypes that we carry with us today. So with the fact that so many enslaved Africans have been brought to Latin America, the treatment of enslaved Africans in Latin America, and then that being after the treatment and the murder and the rapes of the indigenous people who were already there. And so we get narratives like, dark skin being worse than light skin. We get narratives that dark skinned people are lazier. We get narratives that the hair narratives, right? We have comments in my community of who has better hair. Oh my gosh, you were born with beautiful hair. You were born with better hair. The eye colors, I hear all the time. She's so beautiful because she has green eyes. She's so beautiful because she has blue eyes. And that being coveted in our families and our communities. And so I know in my own family, we weren't raised with the racism toward Black Americans. I will say that for sure. My mom is disabled, and she's just very inclusive minded because she knows what it feels like to be excluded. But she has in herself kind of accepted the anti-Blackness. She is darker skinned than the rest of us. My dad is lighter skinned, and she would say things like, "Oh, thank goodness you guys came out light skinned like your dad," and just kind of putting herself down and her darkness down. So that being anti-Blackness. I'm gonna bring in Sandra Calderon Hill. Thank you so much for joining us. She says Dolores Huerta, Lulac, Dr. Gonzalez, who helped Latinos with the GI Bill, etc., are erased from history, but we are there. The silence is deafening. I'm still in dismay how we have children in cages. A crime against humanity just as important as George Floyd. And now he rests in peace, but kids are still in cages right now. So yes, what I am very excited, I guess excited, is that the wrong word, but just the momentum of passion behind civil rights and human rights right now. We have Black people who are standing behind the fact that ICE should be abolished and the fact that kids should not be in cages. Neither one of them negate and police brutality, Latinos for against police brutality and murders against Black Americans. They don't negate each other, right? There's no lack of power that can be given and passion that can be given to each of these issues. There are so many issues that can be focused on for civil rights groups and for groups like mine with behind equity and all of that. There is no lack of power. It is a characteristic of white supremacy to believe that because we are paying mind to George Floyd and the murders of Black Americans and police brutality and the murders at the hands of police, that means that now we can't focus on kids in cages and the fact that ICE should be abolished. There's no limit to the amount of passion and the amount of effort that can go into all of these movements right now, right? They've been ignored for so long because it is to the benefit of our systems and our institutions that they don't be paid attention to and that we don't put, passion behind them. Katina, back to our anti-Blackness, that's where the dark skin comes from in South America. Even some statutes represent those Africans that were brought over. Statues, maybe, Katina, or statutes? Either way, yes. I didn't realize that. I mean, I know maybe I'm being naive and maybe I'm kind of young, but in school, I didn't learn that dark skin in South America and in Central America came mostly from the fact that enslaved Africans had been taken there. Maybe that's my naiveness, but I'm learning, right? We're all on a journey. Sandra, thank you so much for engaging with us. Those characteristics are coveted because they get rewarded. Curriculum needs to value and place various people in the books, TV, media, etc. And we can gather momentum for all human rights and movements. Yes, Susana. You know what, Sandra? I really appreciate you saying that those characteristics are coveted because they will get rewarded. And I'm assuming the white supremacy characteristics. If you don't know about the whites, look, I keep it right here because I'll be pulling it out. White supremacy culture characteristics. If you don't know much about them, it's from dismantlingracism.org. I agree with you, Sandra, is that these characteristics get rewarded. So, for example, perfectionism. Perfectionism being one that isn't necessarily a characteristic of Latino history and Black American history, and yet is coveted by the white normative standards and systems that we live under. The sense of urgency. I remember being at a talk where they talked about how Native Americans would get upset if you were rushing or if you were rushing them, right? You got to the event when you got there, you just loved and you appreciated your company once you were there. Defensiveness, quantity over quality. Please read into these. There's a lot. I'm telling you, this article, man, it'll pull it out. It'll pull it out in you. Edgar, thank you so much. Edgar Galacia, thank you for engaging with us. We mixed way more in our countries, absolutely, and much more than I am even knowledgeable of. I've been telling my circles, like, please let me know how I learn more about Latino history and Latin American history, because I didn't get that in school. And where else do we get it, right? Here in Kansas City, we don't have much centers or museums, right, that are dedicated to this. So help me out. I'm thinking about taking a Latino studies course at UMKC this fall. I don't know. Let me know what you think. Katina, right? Distractions. We're allies. Got to work together because unity is key. They've kept power because they kept us divided. Easier for Latinx people to present as white survival. Thank you, Katina, because that was going to be my next point. So keeping power or making power feel like it's limited. Like, okay, who's going to win this struggle? Which one's the fight that we're all going to be behind this year or this month or this quarter, right? And so the white normative standards in our mind are like, only one of us can win. Only one of us can have the attention right now. And so we better go and fight for that, right? When really they know, and these systems know, that if we think that the power is limited, we'll fight against each other and say, I'm not going to do Black Lives Matter because there's still kids in cages, right? When really we could be building together. And fighting together. Sandra, agendas, timing, deadlines, restricted conversations, and overly polite conversation. All of those being characteristics of white supremacy. Thank you, Sandra, for expanding on that. In the article, the victories won in the struggle, Antonio says, the victories won in the struggle of Black Americans are the foundation of every Latino life in this country, a foundation set by Black people and which Latinos today too often take for granted. I highlighted that because I appreciate how he specified that it's the foundation of our experiences here in America. And I wish that he would have mentioned more the Latino struggle happening at the same time, but I sense the point of the article, right, which is that the 14th Amendment, the fight for against Jim Crow, all of those things have been to the benefit of us as well, to us Asian Americans, right? There is in the article, he goes on to say, I hope we will choose to reject neutrality and fight for racial justice, and that the anti-Black prejudice that are prevalent across Latin America, which has shaped the same structures of slavery and European colonialism as the United States. That has also been to the expense of our own fellow Black Latin Americans. That's, Afro-Latino. I would love to know how old that term is, and the fact that it's not old enough. Right? The fact that we haven't acknowledged Afro-Latinos for long enough in our communities. Again, the session I was in about raising anti-racist kids with Latinx parenting, one of the speakers was Afro-Latina, and she said, my dad still to this day would not dare admit that he's Afro-Latino or that he has Black in his blood, right? Lori, thank you so much for joining us. On one side of my family, it was believed if you don't marry Mexican, it was best to marry white because white opens better opportunities. It was horrific to what side of the family if you were married or in a relationship with a Black person. Mejorando la raza, ¿verdad? O sea, bettering the race was marrying white. If you weren't going to marry Mexican, you married white. Sandra, thank you again for engaging with us. UCLA has a Chicano course. UTP and El Paso has a Latino course. Girl, I am writing those down right now because, yes, I need that in my life. And Lori, of course, thank you for engaging with us. Some more resources. Howard Zinn, A People's History of the United States. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Sandra, for the statistic. 2.5 to 3 million Afro-Latinos in the U.S. There was a statistic that Latinx parenting put up that was about Afro-Latinos and how they identify themselves. And a lot of them, I think it was 80% would identify as Afro-Latino, but then only 30% would associate that with being Black. So that disparity there, right, with that as well is what's a little bit of what's going on in the Latino community as well. So So I'm going to move on to later in the article. I appreciated that he put this in there. He said, Black leaders, activists, writers, and thinkers have left a blueprint for every American of color on how to be American in America that does not treat you as an equal, as well as how to fight for so that it someday might. He said he personally, as a Mexican American, finds pride in the fact that slaves or enslaved people who fled bondage in America found freedom in Mexico, and that the victory at Puebla set back not just the French, but also the Confederates. Shout out to Mexican Americans in Mexico in both of those examples. So again, things I didn't learn in school, that enslaved people had fled bondage and found freedom in Mexico. And then that the victory of Puebla set back the Confederates. So that means that Latinos must demand justice for George Floyd, for Ahmaud Arbery, and for Breonna Taylor. Latinos must say Black Lives Matter, not just on social media, but at our dinner tables and to our families. That's a difficult part of that, right? Is to just debate this with your family and maybe disagree with the elders in your family or other people in your family with facing the anti-Blackness that is already in Latino communities, and the fact that Latinos and other people of color do owe some of our freedoms today to the Black Americans that fought that fight. Of course, as has been mentioned, Latinos were right there as well. So if you see someone who's saying things like, okay, Black Americans haven't fought to abolish ICE, or look, we have been in similar fights and in fights together since fighting was a thing here in America. Latinos joined with Black Americans in the civil rights movement, and Black Americans have been a part of our fights as well. Now the point is for us Latinos to face the anti-Blackness in our community in order to fight that fight right now. Another thing to consider is that Black Americans and Latinos, unfortunately, something we have in common is that our kiddos in school are lower performing than white Americans and than Asian Americans. And so if we got more on the same page so that Black Americans can support Latino students as well, and Latinos can support Black students as well, thinking in an education lens and as a teacher for myself, he kind of breaks down toward the end about what we can do specifically. So having those discussions at the dinner table, recognizing and supporting Black Latinos, and criticizing our countries of origin when they mistreat Black people. When I go to Mexico, there's this very clear thought that lighter skin is better. And when I talk to people in my circles and in my family, it's the same way. I'm pregnant right now with our first baby, and my husband's darker than I am. And there's been a little bit of talk about maybe he'll come out light like you, or we'll see if, he's dark like Juanito. And it's like, all right, first of all, don't talk about my kid like that. Second of all, let's face that anti-Blackness in our Latino community. Ruth, thank you for joining us and engaging with us. Culturally, going against your parents is difficult, even more so if you're telling them they're wrong about their beliefs. We got to do it anyway. It's difficult. It's difficult. I will say, oh gosh, I could say a lot about the comments that you receive from others in your family. The other day, someone told me, "Oh, Susana's gonna do be like white people and only have 2 kids." And I'm like, that's my plan, is to only have 2 kids. So if that's the white way to do things, then okay, I guess. But like those little comments that you're like, why does that have to be a white thing, right? Thank you, Lori, for the claps, because I need them. I need them sometimes. Wrapping up the article, present time. Mexico's shameful complicity with the Trump administration's anti-immigrant policies. I just in the last year, I know it's just so like, I feel bad. I feel guilty really, but I'm learning. And in the last year, only through watching Narcos Mexico, did I learn about the history that goes behind the relationship with the Mexican government and the American government, and how Mexico, first of all, if you haven't watched Narcos Mexico and it's your thing, watch it. But just how this relationship is so toxic to Mexican people and so toxic to people of color, and is so motivated by money. I could go on and on. Lastly, I love that he included the telegram from Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King, to Cesar Chavez. First of all, that's what a telegram looks like. I don't know, printed. I don't know. So Dr. Martin Luther King is saying to Cesar Chavez that he is a living example of the Gandhian tradition, with his great force for social progress and its healing spiritual powers, and that we need the inspiring example and effective leadership you have given. So really learning our history, learning how we have been fighting together, and then learning how we can face, both Black Americans and Latinos can face the fact that we've been pinned against each other in order for these coalitions to not happen, in order for us to be less powerful, right? Lastly, Latinos have benefited from the fight for racial justice, enjoying rights won for us by the struggles of Black people. It's time for Latinos to return the favor. Again, not negating the fight and the struggles Latinos have gone through on our own, not negating the struggles that Latinos continue to go through today. Read up, research, do your duty to learn so that you know how to engage in this fight. Whatever feels comfortable to you. If it feels comfortable to email your city council members, we're talking a lot about defunding police right now. Mayor Lucas just yesterday talked about it being having KCPD be locally run and governed. Diana Munoz just this morning and other people have tried to talk to Quentin Lucas and talk more about how that impacts the Latino community. There's so much going on right now. Find out where you fit in. Latinos have to face our history with anti-Blackness so that we can support and fight with Black Americans the way they have historically with us. So let me pull these last couple things up. Thank you, Martin, for loving our platicas. And Katina, driven and set up by the U.S. drug trade and political corruption. Girl, I actually am rewatching it for the second time right now because Narcos Mexico. Because there's so much history there and how much corruption and money. We could do a whole platica on that for real. Thank you, Katina, also for putting that article in the link. Latinos, all Black Americans, everything. Let me know what you think. On Monday, we're going to have a new article. It might be a video, might be an article, might be a talk. You never know. And then on Tuesday, I will let you know what I think. But Friday, I'm really liking these platicas. Continue to engage with me and with us as we learn together, as we build together, as we become better allies or, better members of our own communities. I'm becoming a better Latina every day, a better mother every day. And so thank you for joining the LEC in this journey, because we are all on that journey to being anti-racist. Let me know if you see something that you think we should feature on here. And then we'll keep the platica going. Thank you, everyone, and have a good weekend. Thank you, Lori. Bye, everyone.